and welcome to another episode of The Focal Thought. My guest today is Marie Cartier. How are you, Marie?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Good to speak with you today. So, Marie, you are an artist, an author, an activist, and a scholar. Specifically, you're a writer and theologian as well, visual performance artist. You've been active in many movements for social change. And you've got your Ph.D. in religion from Claremont Graduate University in women's studies in religion. This is with an emphasis on theology, ethics, and culture. And you've published several articles and poems as well, right?
Yes, and some books, yes.
And some books, great, yes. And I love your poem on the ocean. I think one of your catchphrases from there was, "Can't have the ocean without blue in it." So I encourage the listeners to go read that poem.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's a new one. Thank you.
No, for sure. So I wanted to speak about feminism and religion today. Now, feminism is a topic on its own. Religion is itself a topic on its own. And I was listening a bit to, Gina Messina Dysart the other day. And she's got a small, TED talk that she does. And she really summarized a few points here that I just wanted to get your take on. And, as a starting point from the conversation, traditionally when we're dealing with feminism, we're dealing with oppression. And feminism just happens to fall under, a demographic category. Oppression can happen in many forms. It happens with, young and old in terms of age, color of skin. It happens to do, with where you're from, what your religious beliefs might be. Male, female, there's just the whole gambit of, categories that this occurs on. So when we speak of feminism, we're not really talking about, people who represent the feminine energy, that they want to take over the masculine energy or anything like that. Everyone's just looking for equality, which is how, it traditionally should be, if you believe in that philosophy. And usually when we're discussing or trying to get, some sort of solution for these topics, we start at the current state of where we're at. We're really trying to deal with the symptoms. But one thing that was interesting is when you're talking about feminism and religion, you're actually going way back, centuries back into some of the root causes for why we might have some of these biases, towards the female energy and things like that. So I just wondering if you could speak a little bit regarding that.
Well, I'm glad you listened to Gina's a friend of mine. We went to school together at Claremont. Feminism, I'm a professor at Cal State University Northridge in gender, women's studies, and also queer studies. And the definition that I use of feminism in my classes is often attributed to Gloria Steinem. Feminism is the radical notion that women are people. And I tell my students that they will, if they don't understand that today, the day I'm saying it, they will understand it by the end of 16 weeks. And, it was only 50 years ago that if you said to a group of mixed gender people, everybody get his book, was correct English, right?
Yeah.
So women have been subsumed under men for millennia. And part of feminism is that idea that women are people. So if women are people, then we have to include women in how we look at people. And that hasn't been the case. The case has been that we include women under men. And if men are included, women are supposed, that was part of why do women need the vote? It's just going to double men's vote. It's just going to double their husband's vote, right?
Yeah.
When the Puritans came over from England, a woman who was a wife was called a helpmeet. So you'd say, this is my helpmeet. And what would they do? They were helping to meet my needs. That was actually the definition. So if we go back to the beginning of organized religion, one of the things that I talk about, and Gina may have mentioned this, I unfortunately didn't get to hear her podcast, but the difference between transcendent and embodied religion, and it's probably very crucial for the upcoming conference that we'll both be at, Embodied Philosophy, is that when religion or the idea of worship or what we were worshiping was embodied, women were included in a very direct way because women birth children, women get pregnant, women birth children, women bleed every month. There are things that happen to women that are directly powerful and worshipful. You know, it was a direct thing that we were seeing, that women were having children, were populating the world, were creating tribes, tribal members, workers, populations. When religion moved from embodied worship, which also includes worshiping what we could see, hear, feel, touch, taste, right? The earth, Gaia, the earth, what we could actually connect to a transcendent religion, which is most religions of the book, as we say, religions of the book, religions that had an intermediary, whether that intermediary is a priest, a rabbi, somebody who is standing in for God. Now I can't talk to God directly. Now I have to go through this intermediary. I have to go to mass, service, something, and I have to appeal to this intermediary to get to God. So and God isn't here anymore. God is somewhere else. God is in heaven. God is in some other plane that I want to get to by doing what I am told God wants. And what I am told God wants is through this intermediary, which is the rules of whatever religion of the book I am part of. And we get the idea of sin. Like, I'm doing this, and now I'm not doing what God wants, or I am doing what God wants, and now this is the path to heaven, but heaven is not here. So if heaven is not here in my body on this earth, then in some ways, this body and this earth doesn't matter. What matters is how I'm going to get to somewhere else. And so the transition from embodied to transcendent religion was very damaging to women in particular, not only because what happens in a woman's body was discounted, but also because women weren't put at the center. Women historically have not been those pathways to God.
Got
so
it. Okay.
Pardon?
No, so then, I mean, we look at, you know, the religions like, say, Catholicism, where it's a patriarchal religion, you know, the man in the sky. You know, some other religions have their god as, you know, a male figure. But we've also had goddesses in religion, and, you know, many countries have their goddesses as well, right? I mean, there's Inanna from Mesopotamia, Aphrodite, you know, from Greece, Neith from Egypt, Devi from the Hindu religion. But they still haven't been at the forefront like the male figures have, right?
Yes. Yeah, and we also have to look at who's getting access to those goddesses. Who is the intermediary? If the god is not earthbound, or the goddess, or the higher power, or the figure of authority, how do we get to that figure? Whether they're defined as male or female or otherly gendered, do we as a human being here have the right to directly petition them? Are we deciding how we connect to that being? Overall, that hasn't been true for women. Women overall have not been the intermediaries who are telling us, yes, this is what you do. This is what you do to attain favor in that higher power's eye and get access to a transcendent reality, you know, otherwise known as heaven. I mean, I'm baptized Catholic. So for me, it is a very, you know, there was a very direct line growing up of the place you want to get to is not here on earth. The place you want to get to is outside here. And how you're going to get here is what's defined by the priest, what those 10 commandments are. And there was no, I wanted to be a priest. when I was a kid, I was in Catholic school. I saw the nuns, I saw the priests, and I wanted to be a priest. And in second grade, I remember the nun saying, and I was brought up in New Hampshire, so the nun was saying that God is in every person. God's in every person. And I said, raised my hand. I said, so God's in every person, sister, God's in me. And she goes, yeah, God's in you, Marie. And I said, well, if God's in every person and God's in me, then God could be a woman, right? And the nun said, Marie, there are some mysteries we are not meant to understand. That was second grade. So there are some mysteries we are not meant to understand has been the answer in quotes to women for centuries. You're not supposed to understand it. You're just supposed to obey it.
Obey it, yeah. Do you think the issue might be with the language? So, like in the Catholic religion, the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, God is a male figure. God should just be gender neutral. That's how, God should be referred to. Because that might have been sort of the backbone as to, why it's become very sort of androcentric, right?
Yes and no, but, even the way the translations have happened over time, there's and who holds the power? I mean, if we are really to talk about Jesus and what depictions Jesus has in paintings and sculptures, etc., Jesus is a working class man of color. That's who actually, physically, if Jesus existed, which I believe he existed, if he existed and lived where we thought he'd live, he is a working class man of color. Rarely is he depicted that way.
Sure.
So there's a lot of ways power structures are set up. And one of those ways is all the rules, the structures, what we worship, the iconography, the literature. So it's not just that language. I mean, that language has been translated, it wasn't originally written in English. It's been translated. And that brings us back to our very first point, Croydon, that we were talking about. I mean, how women were subsumed under men. That was why Ms. Magazine started in the United States, right? Where up until the 70s, somebody would meet you and you were introduced as either Mrs. or Miss. Because the very first thing that somebody would want to know about you as a woman was whether or not you were available. And so Ms. Magazine created the language of MS, and so that you don't know whether you are married or single, correct? And that was never true for men. If you're Mr. Smith, we don't know if you're married or not. But if you're Mrs. Smith, I know you're married. And if you're Miss Smith, I know you're single. And so that language that has designated women as property is longstanding. And the removal of it is still very, I'm going to just use the word poignant. It's still there. I have had people say to me, what should I call you? And I'm like, well, my title is Dr. Cartier. And then, well, what should I call you? Dr. Cartier. Well, but are you Mrs. Miss? It's Dr. Cartier. There's a way that's still very, those kind of honorifics that don't designate whether or not a woman is owned are still today in place.
Wow. So we're dealing with a social structure here, right? That's taken concrete form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so, I think. Yeah. Do
you think, from your studies and just from your, your own thoughts, that anytime you have two polar opposites, so like male and female, black or white, young and old, there'll always be sort of this natural progression towards domination. And I don't say natural to excuse it, but just a tendency to dominate one over the other. And that's why we're seeing currently that, there's favoritism, for the males in social, structure, etc., rather than female. And the reason for why that might be, why we're here today, why is it not the opposite way? Why is it not, the females that have, taken majority power over the males. Because there are some places around the earth where we do have, matriarchal societies. In the Umoja in Kenya, they're actually a tribe, which is, typically no man's land. These are people who've had, abuse, and, they come together and live together. We've got the Bribi in Costa Rica. That's a tribe where women are revered. They prepare the sacred drinks, only they're allowed. Or the Mosuo in China. They practice Buddhism, and their lineage is traced through, the women figures in the family. So what are your thoughts on that?
Patriarchy is real,
Yeah.
Patriarchy is a worldwide horrible phenomenon. So the places where patriarchy doesn't exist are few and far between. And look at the heads of state, governments. Governments affect how religion operates. I mean, my work has primarily been in LGBTQ plus studies. So within the lesbian and gay, bisexual, transgender community, even the idea of lesbians was something that had to be fought for, to have space for the feminine. But when you speak of isolated tribes, and even when you mention, these people prepare sacred drinks, and as I said, embodiment is worshipped in those places. And the places where we introduce a transcendent religion, so a transcendent religion is introduced as the pathway to God, that's where we see, like, people giving tons of money to a conservative church to go to Africa and convert, right? To convert a group of people to a religion that is outside of what they can control. So as soon as we give our power over to a large authority, and we're allowing that large authority that we don't have input in to say, well, this is what it is, this is how it's done. We're just seeing, look at the horrible stuff that's coming out from Canada about what happened to Native people.
Yeah.
And the bodies that they're finding of Native children, those orphanages. What gave Canada the authority to take those children from tribal families? It was deemed as like the respected, the right, the authority to kowtow to an authority that was like native language is wrong, native customs are wrong. And often often the things that you're talking about are embodied practice. And embodied practice, as I said, has tended to favor women, tended to favor the feminine. And when we've removed that, like the shame around menstruation, the shame around breastfeeding, the shame around the very things that a woman's body does naturally, is something that patriarchy has instilled, so that the power of the feminine is covered, decreased, seen as nil. And so that women are breastfeeding in private, women cover up their periods, women, the idea that I am birthing life, or that every, when I was a radical feminist lesbian, I used to wear a t-shirt that said, I am woman, I can bleed for days and not die. And so that kind of power structure, that sense of I am woman, I can bleed for days and not die, that is something that may be owned in individual spots around the globe, as you've stated, but it's not a place that women are encouraged to inhabit, certainly in the wider world. Because what would happen? I mean, Muriel Rukeyser, a famous poet from the American 50s, said if one woman told her the truth about her life, the world would be split open.
Correct, yeah. And the matriarchal societies I mentioned, they're very small in terms of, some communities are 40,000, some maybe, 12,000.
So we can't expect that. And there's probably, if we were to go inside those places, it would be interesting to see what pressures are on even those tiny spots on the globe to change, to become civilized. And what is civilized? What is that? What was it to the native children in Canada? What was it to become civilized, to no longer speak a native language, to no longer dress in a native way, to no longer eat native foods, to become westernized? And what does that mean to embodiment? Usually means that we are giving our power over to this intermediary who is now going to tell us, even the language, we're going to transcend this body. Women don't get to transcend their body. If I'm bleeding every month for the majority of my life, if I start bleeding at 13 and I stop bleeding at like 55, but every month I'm supposed to be ashamed of that happening, what does that do to me? Who am I then? What a difference it would be if when I started bleeding at 13, I was celebrated for that.
Sure, yeah.
And how would those intermediary 40 years of my life be if that was seen as, and of course, in original cultures, you see somebody bleed, you see them stop bleeding, you see them start carrying a child. What kind of power that is. So when patriarchy chose to assert and kind of power, one of the first things they needed to do was cut that power of women's embodiment off, because that was the thing that was being worshipped. I mean, I have dual citizenship with Ireland and the United States, and many of the structures of churches, if you go, that were made by Irish workers, people who lived in Ireland, and they were working to create the churches that were built by the Catholic Church over many times over pagan sites. You'll see the shill and a gig above the doorway, and the shill and a gig is the split-tailed mermaid. And people used to touch that space between the legs of the mermaid as a blessing, and you'll see that it's completely worn down. That space between the legs of the split mermaid is completely worn down. And why did they touch that space? You know, there's images of the shill and the gig birthing the world through her split tail.
Oh,
and she's often seen as a crone, an old woman who's like, this is what I did. I birthed the world. You know, whether or not you birthed a baby or work, or you nurtured, or you were part of the community, you were birthing this, you know, this is life. And now if I decide that's no longer worthy to be worshiped, I've changed how people, I've changed how people can view that. You know, is it now secret? Is it now like a secretive thing to talk about that? So it's interesting. And even if you go to the Irish Museum and you'll see Sheila and the gigs there, there's barely any literature on the wall, or at least when I was there doing some research, there's barely any literature on the wall about what do these mean and why were they worn out between the tail, where the birthing place would be.
So then what would you say is the reason maybe why the patriarchs gain power? Because, you know, from some of the males that I know, a lot of their success has been attributed because of their, you know, their female spouse. And a lot of them, you know, when they come home, they answer to the female spouse, right? If they've been out late or, you know, things like that. Is it because, you know, maybe might makes right in terms of physical strength, or because, you know, traditionally the males had to go out and work while the females stayed home and, you know, tended to the domestic duties? Or what are your thoughts on those?
I'm not sure I understand you. Why has patriarchy been the dominant force in the world structures?
Yes, so far, yeah.
Part of it was physical strength, but also part of it was the move, as I've said, the move from embodied to transcendent and the rise of industrialism. So if there was a very different power structure when what I'm doing is birthing the children that will work the farm. For instance, one example, I'm seen as very much, and I'm cooking and gathering and creating the food that will, and birthing the workers, right? I can see my contribution to the way the power structure works and the way that our the way that this family system is working. When there was a move to industrialism, then, and men were going out to work because women were birthing children, then it was suddenly, there was not suddenly, but over time, there was seeing that women weren't contributing because women weren't getting the paycheck. And the fact that women were still cooking, cleaning, delivering, giving birth to babies, etc., was not seen as valuable as the people who were going out and getting a paycheck. So, I mean, I think there's two things. One is the move from embodied to transcendent worship, and also the move from a farm, living off the land structure to an industrial structure. And in order to keep that structure where, as I said, when the English first came to the United States, the wife was seen as a helpmeet. So these are very, very long-standing structures that we've never had a woman president in the United States.
Or a female pope.
Or, well, there was a female pope apparently, but, she didn't last very long.
Oh, was there? Okay.
So, I mean, supposedly there was, yes. So, which is why they now apparently look up the robes of the priest to make sure he's a male. So, how patriarchy, and the other part of it is, I think, one of the ways I break it down to my students is that the etymology of the word patriarchy, right, is from the word patriarch. The patriarch is father, and we want to think that father is benevolent, father is good, father has our best interest at heart, right? But that's not true necessarily. I mean, in any family that is based on that patriarchal structure, it's the luck of the draw, whether you have a good father or an abusive father.
Yes.
And that goes all the way up to the way patriarchal governments are set up. So when we hear, well, they would never do that, right? Yes, they would, as we just saw in Canada, as we're seeing with what's being shown here, as what we saw with Trump, as what will they do? Are they concerned with women's lives? Are women considered people? To bring back to what I talked about at the beginning, right? Are women considered people in how we're looking at it? Are they part of what happens? I'm not sure that it's still true, but at one point here we have spraying for crops in the coast of California, up California. Okay. And how they determined the safety of that was they determined that it was safe for a 150-year-old man. So if it was safe for 150-year-old man, not 150-pound man. So is that safe for women? Is that safe for pregnant women? Is that safe for children? No, it was assumed that because it was safe for a 150-pound man, it was safe, right? The maximum that you're going to give an aspirin for heart, to keep your heart healthy, was determined on a test of 200 male doctors. And they said they couldn't find enough female doctors, so they just said that was true for everybody. You didn't first of all, they probably try to find 200 female doctors, but you didn't have to find 200 female doctors to decide whether that was actually accurate for the female body. So often this idea of like Mrs. or Miss is subsumed under the Mr. has come to be incredibly damaging for women because women aren't considered. Our bodies are different. What does it mean for us to have melathion spraying? What does it mean, for us to take an aspirin a day for a heart condition? It hasn't been, it's safe for men, so it's safe. So that kind of believing comes from the idea patriarchy, patriarch, father, benevolent father. It's absolutely not true. Many people, including myself, come from abusive homes with an abusive dad. It's the luck of the draw. And I wouldn't even say it's the luck of the draw for governments. it's often just the way it's seen. So how often in the United States when Hillary was running, did we hear, well, I don't know if a woman can be president. What does that even mean? You know, of course,
Yeah.
a woman, you know, women are not naturally nurturers. Women are not naturally mothers. Women are not naturally these things. There are places in the world that people are allowed to go, and the places that women have been allowed to go is the nurturing track. And
Well, you know, it just makes me wonder. I mean, you know, we're definitely advanced, so to say, in terms of, you know, technology and medicine, things like that. But then in some of these basic fundamentals, you know, just how backwards we are and how much time we've lost just by, you know, not having everything on a level playing field, and how much further ahead we would be if we just saw each other as, you know, humans rather than, you know, differentiating categories or demographics.
yes, one thing that I do with my students to get them to see, this is in a beginning women's studies class, is I say, everybody take, and this is of course in the United States, I say, everybody take out your money, whatever money you have. It gets harder as everybody has credit cards, but put whatever money you have on the desk, you know, put any money you have on the desk. And then I walk around and I say, what do people see? What do people see on the money? What does anybody see on the money? And it takes a while, but eventually they say there's no women on the money. In the United States, there's been no, and then why is there no women? And I said, what if you were an alien and you came down to the United States and you saw this, you saw that what people did with these pieces, these coins and these papers, is what do they do with this stuff? And they go, they buy things. I go, so what does that represent? That represents power. And so what does it mean that there's, I go, if you were an alien and you were reporting back to the mothership what was happening here, you'd say, well, the people, you know, a lot of the people who have a certain kind of plumbing, and most have like breasts, or what, you know, if I was an alien, I might just say people who are kind of smaller in stature, many have bumps on the front of their bodies, and they have a certain kind of plumbing, they aren't on the stuff that buys stuff. And then there's people who have a different kind of plumbing, they're on the stuff that, they're on the pieces that buy stuff. I mean, if you were an alien, the fact that there's no women on the money, you could make a pretty clear distinction pretty early on that who has the power.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in Canada, we've got the Queen on our currency. And as recent, you know, we've got Viola Desmond that they've put on. So some comfort there.
Right. I mean, the United States is very clearly in a different category.
Yeah. No. But no, that's great. I mean, thanks again for, you know, coming on this episode and, you know, shed some thought-provoking statements on, you know, issues that are very detrimental to how we move forward. And, you know, it's things that, you know, we really should automatically be thinking of, but we're not. But because of people like you, you know, you're educating out there to your students and to other people. And that's really great. And, you know, we hope to see, I mean, you know, people like Francesca Di Giovanni, who's the governor of Vatican, you know, that's a high position there, and Lucinda Laird, who's the dean of, you know, a Protestant church. We hope to see more, you know, people in power like that, because like what you're doing is, you know, you're changing it at the forefront of, you know, social structure that stems back centuries, which has conditioned our worldview, you know, towards this patriarch society. So once again, thanks so much, Marie, for coming on. And if people want to get a hold of you, where's the best place for that, for your work?
MarieCartier.com.
Okay, your website, and I'll put that on the show notes.
And the page for my book, Baby You Are My Religion, Women, Gay Bars, and Theology Before Stonewall, about gay bars being church spaces for gay people prior to 1973, being a kind of alternate church place for gay people who were really in exile. So that there is a website for Baby You Are My Religion.
Okay, I'll put that on the link as well. That's great. And once again, thank you very much, and I wish you the best.
Thank you, Croydon. Take care and good luck with everything.
Thanks.